All right, here we go. We're back at it. Welcome to my tiny sanctuary. So, the great cosmic mother rediscovering the religion of the earth. So, we are in chapter 3. We started outside, but then it got dark. And didn't have my light set up. So, we're going to get inside the sanctuary and we're going to start back in chapter 3. If you don't know what it is, chapter 3 is about the original Black Mother. This page 27. One interesting fact in the reconstruction of both African history, specifically in ancient matriarchies generally, is that there was a great explosion of scholarly interest in these subjects between the two world wars between 1920 and the mid-1930s. Helen Diner, Robert Briffault, Margaret Murray, and Jessie Weston were passionately digging up evidence of women's ancient cultures and religion, building on Jan Ellen Harris's great work of the 1910s. During this same period, W.E.B. Du Bois Carter, G. Woodson, Leo Weiner, and the German Eugene George, among others, were exploring Black African history, building on the 1913 published work of Frobenius and the work of Joseph McCabe, who explored pre-Christian world history, including ancient African history from 1917 to 1935. Because ancient women's culture existed everywhere, including Africa, and because Africa was originally matriarchal, there was a great deal of overlap in some of these studies, with most students reaching the same conclusion: women, and furthermore, dark women, were the originators of most of what we know as human culture. With the eruption of World War II, these studies were cut off, and they were never picked up again, at least in the mainstream academic world. Since the 1950s, all research into women's past history, as well as into Black African history, has been initiated and carried thoroughly through by highly motivated independent women and Black researchers, functioning outside the academic establishment and in an atmosphere of submersive investigation. And in our sub rosa research, we have found these great pioneering works of the 1920s and 1930s co-signed to the academic dustbins as eccentric and non-reputable histories. What was the devastating effect of World War II on these earlier studies? Apparently, the reputed alignment of Hitler and Nazism with paganism has had long-lasting results. They are still equated in many minds, especially in the United States. Pagan remains a code word for everything evil, brutal, and willfully destructive, i.e., a code word for Nazism, seen as a deliberate revival of the pre-Christian orgastic and bloodthirsty Teutonic spirit. Wow. Okay, let's get on to this. I'm gonna sit up right here because it's getting heavy. These equations occurs despite Wilhelm Reich's clear and irrefutable analysis of German Nazism as a predictable eruption of puritanical, patriarchal culture. People who indulge in 500 years of inquisition led by both Catholic and Protestant churchmen, jurists, and local magistrates, erupted again 2 centuries later in the Nazism of the 1930s. As we show later, the European Inquisition, as we will show later, the European Inquisition and German Nazism were based on the same patriarchal principles and used the same historical scapegoating and mass manipulation techniques, i.e., German Nazism was an expression of European Christian development and cannot in any historic sense be blamed on pre-Christian paganism. Nevertheless, the equation has occurred, and this combined with Western sexism and racism with their chronic fears of the dark, the contaminating female, and the lurking bestowed jungle forces has created an official, academic, as well as public hostility toward any serious investigation of the pagan, i.e., the non-Christian, the non-white, the non-good. This hostility has been the excuse, if not the motivation, for a general refusal to recognize the importance of research into both ancient African cultures and ancient matriarchies. The pagan, the female, and the dark are still interpreted as attributes of the devil, and the desire of too many people is still to push them out of sight and out of mind. Yeah, that's what they want to do, and that's what they've been attempting to do for the last 4,500 years, as we see. In one area alone, Westerners allowed themselves to explore this material, to explore the pagan, the dark, and the female, and to admit its familiarity, wow. Why am I having problems with this word? Familiarity is intimate familiarity, you know what I'm trying to say, as the stuff of dreams. Familiarity as the stuff of dreams. This is the area of psychoanalytical and in particular Jungian study. Wow, Jungian study. Erich Neumann, especially in The Great Mother, an analyst of the archetype, has gathered together powerful statues, paintings, and other icons of the great goddess, as she was worshipped for thousands of years worldwide. An attempt to analyze the meaning of her many manifestations as Good Mother, Terrible Mother, White and Black Mother, Lady of the Beasts and Plants, and so forth. To avoid the controversial existence of real matriarchies, Neumann and other Jungians say it is not relevant whether a belief in the goddess arises out of a society shaped by women or by men. But they clearly assume the beliefs, as well as all these icons, were shaped by men. The Great Mother exists for them as archetype only, as the classical mental object of the male mind struggling to develop and understand itself. The real historical existence of real matriarchies in which women created goddess symbols and images out their own female experience, worshipped by women and men alike. This interpretation would be revolutionary, and Jungians go out of their way to avoid politics. Their studies concentrate exclusively on the individual in isolation. A solipsistic paradigm deriving from the privileged economic status of both the analyst and the client, focusing on the disconnected individual ego in the modern world. They cannot understand the political content of the ancient myths, their economic and social background, and the female communal environment from which they emerge. Also using without question the 19th century developmental models of inevitable and linear progress. Jungians theorized that mother goddess religions, if they existed only near the temporal origins of human culture. Therefore, they must express only the infancy of the race or of the individual psyche. Psychoanalytical arrogance corresponds to Christian theology's view of all pagan religions as spiritually underdeveloped by positioning Mother Goddess archetypes as infantile or as inchoate subconscious material. Inchoate subconscious material. Wow, infantile. When Jungians say that the unconscious belongs to the realm of the mother, they are right, but they do not draw the enormous socio-political conclusions from this. Contemporary man is possessed by powers that are beyond his control. His gods and demons have not disappeared at all. They have merely got new names. They keep him on the run with restlessness, vague apprehensions, psychological complications, an insatiable need for pills, alcohol, tobacco, food, and above all, a large array of neuroses. Modern sickness is that of disconnection, the ego unable to feel an organic part of the world, except via chemical and popular culture addiction. But when the healers, the physicians of mind and body, do not know themselves, what it is we need to be connected to, how can they solve the syndrome of disconnection? When the ego lets itself go, sinks down into the oceanic all oneness of the beginning and its peace, the shrinks call this regression. They have virtually defined mature-mindedness as a state of permanent alienation and ironically differentiated from the all. What this amounts to is that the mature mind is the male mind, rejecting his mother. And when you think about it, that's basically how the modern day society, when you look at the families, that's exactly what it is. How many of you can experience rebellion from a mother and child? So specifically, the child and the mother and child, like specifically. And also, you have the father and child, you have a lot of rebels and fights going on as well. But I think that's just a reflection of how the patriarchy has set up the religions to be, with excluding and keeping out the mother God. Within Western culture, whenever the doors of perception open ever so little to let us catch a glimpse of the holographic cosmic mind within us, we are in danger of being locked up for psychiatric observation and given tranquilizers and other cures. The established patriarchal institutions all have a vested interest in keeping the individual mind disconnected from the experience of cosmic oneness, because this disconnection is patriarchy. The bulk of patriarchal industries, industries, drugs, alcohol, entertainment, media, fashion and cosmetics, pornography, the tourist business, polyester suited politics, drive in religious sermons, interstate freeway systems, you name it, exists and profits solely by selling momentary diversions to multitudes of quietly desperate people seeking an anesthetic escape from the pain of personal alienation. Ain't that the truth? Man, the time it is to be living in this era to where the truth is here. The truth is exposed, and it's your choice whether you still want to continue being a slave or if you want to become the master. And I say that by like learning the laws of nature, the laws of the universe, and mastering it so that we can be the master of our reality, the master of our destiny, the captain of our soul. You know what I'm saying? This is wild. And like the reviews say, this is some juicy, juicy-ish right here. And what greater time it is to awaken, to be aware and to reconnect back to the source of all source. To make that shift mentally from patriarchy to matriarchy. Yeah. What in ancient times was experienced as our superconsciousness within which we perceive the I, thou of the ego dissolving into the cosmic being of oneness, and whereby we receive understanding, wisdom, transcending dualism, magic perception, and healing powers is now wholly submerged within us and termed the unconscious. And the psychotherapeutic establishment, including Juggins, portray this unconscious as essentially a frightening and threatening realm, the dark jungle within, the place of orgastic desires, cannibal land, the black, hairy forest full of beasts, i.e., the pagan, the female, the dark. A ring of terror is placed around the unconscious for patriarchal political reasons, to keep us in a permanent state of fear and distrust in regard to our own innermost beings, and vis-a-vis the vast cosmos. Patriarchy manipulates and profits from this chronic state of fear and alienation, and Western religious and social history can be read as one long attempt to repress the cosmic female by keeping this fearful alienation institutionally alive and intact. Students of mythology find that when the feminine principle is subjected to sustained attack, as it was from the medieval Christian authorities, it often quietly submerges under the water where organic life began. It swims through the subconscious of the dominant male society, occasionally bobbing to the surface to offer a glimpse of the rejected harmony. Whew. Patriarchal politics, religion, and psychotherapy are always there, militant and quick to tell us that this rejected harmony is childish, illusionary, crazy, blasphemous, or unpatriotic. And we should know by now its reasons for doing so. But a breakthrough and some very interesting clinical experiments conducted between 1975 and 1979, a variety of female, male, and adolescent psychotherapy patients who received the subliminal message, Mommy and I are one, flashed on a tacticscope screen, were much more successful and permanently successful at losing weight, stopping drinking and smoking, and overcoming emotional problems to improve reading skills than were patients receiving neutral or no subliminal messages. Designed by psychologist Lloyd Silverman of New York University and described in his book, The Search for Oneness. These studies show that successful overcoming of problems, i.e., mature development, does not come from serving the early infantile sense of unity with the mother, but from reestablishing it. The holistic point of ancient women's religion was that the mother is not one's personal maternal parent solely, but the entire community of women, the entire living earth, and beyond this, the entire surrounding and ongoing cosmic process. One cannot be alienated because one is always within this process, as it is always within itself, unless, of course, such knowledge is suppressed from the outside by patriarchal conditioning. Truly, our very sanity is at stake with continuing patriarchy and the denial of the cosmic self, the goddess, within us all, and us within her. The Great Mother was the projection of the self-experience of groups of highly aware and productive women who were the founders of much of human culture. In this sense, the Great Mother is not simply a mental archetype, but a historical fact. Ancient icons, symbols, and myths cannot be understood if they are disembodied from this fact. They cannot be understood as mind trips alone, but must be seen in the context of ancient political realities. I got one more page. Stay with me. Or go read it on your own. Get the book and just read along. Just listen to it while you're cleaning up, doing your dishes, or taking a shower, or putting on your makeup, sitting on a commode. Just listen to it. Any audio of the Great Cosmic Mother. There ain't many out there, but just put on audio. Put it on autopilot and let it play. And let this ring into your subconscious and unlock keys. Unlock the serpent from within. Unlock the goddess within. So, Robert Graves, Welsh poet, essayist, and historical novelist, was one of the few modern students of mythology who took those ancient female political realities seriously. In his two-volume work, The Greek Myths, Graves showed that the major theme of Greek myth was the gradual historic reduction of women from sacred beings to slaves. The dramatic core of Greek myth and drama is the actual transition, circa 300 BC, from matriarchy to patriarchy in the Aegon, and the repercussions of this transition on the psyches of the Greek people. In The White Goddess, Graves traces the origins of the European great goddess, her connections with world mythologies and world alphabets, always a goddess invention, and her attempt obliteration by the Roman Empire and the Christian religion. Many feminists dislike Graves' interpretation of the goddess as occasionally, at least, a white bitch. But Graves' main concern is to relate to the goddess as a male poet. and to rediscover the European roots of goddess worship. It remains for women to interpret the goddess as women relating to women, and only black women, Oriental women, and Native American women can completely rediscover and reanimate the original goddesses of Africa, Asia, and Americas for us. It's the job of the white Europeans and Americans, after all, to stop explaining everyone else and to begin trying to understand ourselves and how our own history, to understand ourselves and our own history. But when Graves shows in his exploration of early Greek and European goddesses that the loss of our mythic history is the loss of our psycho-political history, he speaks to all of us. Probably the greatest student of ancient mythology as ancient female political history was Robert Briffault, an anthropologist, gynecologist, and Marxist. Briffault spent 10 concentrated years of his life, thereby ruining his health, researching and writing his enormous work, The Mothers, probably the most thorough collection of evidence for the early existence of matrifocal cultures and great goddess religions throughout the world. The data Briffault collected is global and irrefutable. Once we read Briffault and Graves, we can never again look at the Great Mother as a political archetype, a political archetype, as some power image that exists in our minds only, but never in historical reality. Because the Great Mother was a historic reality, her psychological suppression also must be seen in historical terms as a political suppression of an early female-oriented world order by a later male-dominant one. Throughout Europe, especially Eastern Europe, but also in Spain, France, and Italy, we can find black Madonnas. People have local legends to explain the blackness of these Virgin Mary statues, including the indigenous idea that the icon is shard, the miraculous survival of a terrible fire. Jugin interpreters would see the blackness as a subconscious reference to the dark side of something or other, the moon, no doubt. It is rarely speculated that a real historic blackness of the early goddess of Egypt and Africa is being recalled. But when we read Briffault and the other researchers into early mythic history and see not only the black African origins of the Great Mother, but the extent to which early matriarchal Africans traveled throughout the ancient world, spreading the black goddess, her pyramid technologies, stone and clay arts, and hieroglyphic scriptures everywhere, then it is easy to understand the existence of these black Madonnas. They are not psychological symbols of the dark side of the Mother of Christ, or not solely or originally. They are solid, iconic remains of the ancient time when the religion of the black goddess ruled Africa, from thence much of the rest of the world. Here's another. In The Adventure of Mankind, the German scholar Eugene George argued that the Atlanteans were Ethiopians, supreme in Africa and Asia, who also penetrated into southern Europe. It was only after thousands of years of battle that these black Atlantean invaders were finally pushed out of Europe, but the genetic memory of Europeans still bears traces to this experience. George suggests that this ancient memory survives in the European dread of dragons, who are, after all, loved and celebrated everywhere throughout Asia, India, Africa, Mexico, Central, and South America. For as George points out, the dragon painted on the insignia of the kings was carried in the van of the black armies. The dragon that represents dark earth energies to those converted to the white sky god beliefs. The crow dragon with its tail and its mouth that represents the ancient female holism is to the all-conquering linear male. Such a dragon also historically was carried into Europe on the banners of the matriarchal Atlantean